All right, so let's talk new government. We're declared independence, we're fighting a war, but there is one small detail, and that's how do we rule ourselves? Up until this point, we've basically followed whatever England's told us to do. We had a king, but we've had this brilliant idea of self-rule, independence, citizen's voice. So, lo and behold, that means we actually have to create something that, to be honest, has only been toyed with in the past by the Romans, the Greeks, and now we're going to take it and make it into this modern new government. So, we're going to focus on that, the building of a brand new government under something known as our Articles of Confederation, officially America's very first constitution. You heard me, first. The one that we actually live under now is actually Constitution, take 2. So let's go ahead and discuss this together so you get a gist of what we're talking about. Now, our objective is basically to examine the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Because again, notice that I say that this is, in fact, our first constitution, meaning our first form of government. But what you should notice right out of the gates is that, much like the house in this picture, our first government was a little bit weak in the knees, or a little weak in the foundations, meaning that while it was in play and it did serve its purpose, there were certain aspects of it that weren't quite maybe as strong as they should have been. So, we can't talk about weaknesses and ignore the strengths. The fact is, the Article of Confederation did have 2 major achievements. For one, it did help bring the American Revolution to a successful conclusion, meaning that this government that functioned under the Articles did in fact function well for the time being, or the period of time we needed it to. Secondly, it did help to establish something known as the Northwest Ordinance, meaning that once we won the war, because we were going to go ahead and say once we won as opposed to if, the fact of the matter is there was a lot of territory in Western lands in this continent that we had to know how to rule over. And so the Articles helped establish this Northwest Ordinance. It gave us a plan for not only adding the Western lands to our belongings and holdings, but also to help govern it. So, why did the Articles of Confederation actually fail as a form of government? Why was its rule of law not as strong as it should have been? For one, America still had some major currency issues or money issues that did not get addressed or handled by this Articles of Confederation. For one, the states did not have a common currency, meaning that, let's say you lived in Pennsylvania and went to New York and then went to Massachusetts, you would have to exchange your money every single time you went to a new state, or have to figure out an exchange rate, meaning maybe 5 shillings in Massachusetts might have been worth 1 New York dollar. And so trade between states was actually kind of complicated. It also meant that Americans now had to carry many forms of money. They had to carry the money issued by our federal government. They had to carry money issued by the state governments. And let's add some more things to complicate matters. We actually had to carry foreign currency to trade with French or Spanish or the remaining English. Well, lo and behold, what ended up starting to happen was a lot of merchants actually refused money that was from outside of their own state, which then meant that basically if you came into, say, Delaware from Pennsylvania, your money officially would have been worthless in Delaware. Now, guys, this doesn't help trade. In fact, this caused a thing to happen that's known as inflation, where essentially when the value of money goes down, prices for goods goes up to compensate. So, for example, let's say you have Pennsylvania dollars. In Pennsylvania, they're worth 5 of them, but you go to Delaware and they're worth 1. Well, now, instead of just buying the same object for $5 in Delaware, that same object would actually cost you 25 Pennsylvania dollars in Delaware. And so this does not help trade. In fact, this ends up surging everything. Now, reason 2 for failure. Honestly, debt. We've talked about this. War does create money, but it also creates debt. And so in the case of the Americans, well, Congress, under the Articles of Confederation, had actually borrowed quite a bit of money from people and the states to pay for this war. They issued something known as bonds, which essentially is like an IOU. I'm going to borrow $25 from you today, but I promise to pay you in the future with a little interest. Well, lots of things start happening. For one, Congress, under the Articles of Confederation, did not have the ability to tax, so it couldn't raise money to pay people back. And with that being said, without the ability to raise money, the United States could not pay its debts. So, fun fact, by the end of the Revolutionary War, not only did the United States owe money to its own citizens, we actually also owed money to France, to Holland, and to Spain, who made us loans to actually win this war against England. Just for the record, France, Holland, and Spain were not fans of England, so they were happy to help, but they also wanted their money back. Now, at the same time, understand the United States also had made a lot of promises to the soldiers who fought in the war and then failed to pay them. We're going to talk about those issues here in a bit. Now, a third problem. Well, under the Articles of Confederation, we were states that were united, but not United States. So basically, every state sort of stood kind of independent. Well, after the Revolutionary War, the United States really didn't have a united military defense. Each state sort of had its own militias or its own reserves. And so basically, it left every state having to defend itself if, in fact, they were invaded by other countries. Now, if you look at the map, you'll notice that the United States at this time was surrounded by the English up in the north and the Spanish to the south and west, not to mention Native Americans that really were not thrilled about us being there. And so we had a situation where if a state felt threatened by a specific country, it didn't mean that they would get any support from any other states. And none of them could come to agreement. Now, let's add some more trickiness to this. You're going to notice right here that there's land that was quote-unquote ceded by Connecticut. Well, this land out here, guys, was actually fought over by both Connecticut and Virginia. And at one point, both of them tried to lay claim to that land and actually threatened to go to war with each other. So here we are, a new country with a new government, and we're actually already threatening to go to war with each other. Sort of defeats the purpose of being independent from England. So we actually see not only that we can't defend ourselves against other nations, we now legitimately are having issues between us, like really angry siblings. Well, lo and behold, guys, when you have a situation where we are not united as a military front or a government front, it actually sets us up for failure on a global scale. Because the fact is, other countries actually saw us as weak. And to be fair, an easy target. Now, the fourth reason why the Articles of Confederation fail is actually a weak government structure. Our executive branch lacked a president. In fact, under the Articles of Confederation, the executive branch served more like a small committee of individuals, of two or more, that kind of oversaw the actions of others. And so we didn't really have any definitive leadership in the sense of a president. And at the same time, we had what's known as a unicameral house, or a one-house Congress. So the problem with this being a weakness is that basically laws were very difficult to pass. Because in order to pass laws, we actually needed the approval of 9 out of 13 states, as opposed to, say, majority rule, which would have been 7 out of 13 states. Also, Congress was responsible to the actual state, but not so much the people who live there. So Congress did not represent the people from which the state they came. Congress just represented the people who sat in government. And so it was not a true representation of what the people wanted. Now, I'm going to add a little thing here too. Under the Articles of Confederation, if we wanted to pass laws, laws had to be essentially passed almost unanimously. So let's say 12 out of 13 states wants to pass a law. If that 13th state, and let's say Rhode Island, the smallest of the states, said no, then it didn't matter that the other states wanted it. The law didn't happen. Now, other fun facts. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress had no power to collect taxes at all. They could not regulate trade between the states. They could not enforce laws or even create a military as needed. So really, Congress didn't have nearly as much power to represent its people than it claimed to have. So now, guys, you're going to take these notes and head into your activity Let me know what you need. I am here to help.